I've been trying to work on Farlan's music. I had a little plan for YouTube, which involved getting a lot more songs down off the fuzz decks. And I think I probably told you before, the fuzz decks and I do not have a very good relationship. Even though, you know, it's reckoned to be one of the simplest of the multi-trackers out there. I have never really figured out how to use it, and I think Farlan, as a fellow primitive, also had problems with even the simplest of technology, and I'm not 100% sure that he knew quite how to use it either. So none of that quite makes for, getting fantastic sound quality on Farlan's songs. Sometimes the voice comes out good, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it's kind of muffled up with the music. So I've had to shelve my little plan, and I'm just going to let you hear a song that I've already got down. It's called Pretended and Played, and I think it's a little bit autobiographical. Also, the painting, I'm going to show you a painting of Farlan's along with it. As a painter, Farlan had two favourite subjects. You know, some painters just like to sort of get the one thing that they paint over and over again. Well, Farlan had two things that he painted over and over again. One was the female nude. They were very, I think I can only remember one male nude in Farlan's paintings, plenty of female nudes. The other thing that Farlan liked to paint was musicians. Sometimes his nudes were musicians, and sometimes his musicians were nudes. Not always, but sometimes. So the painting that I'm showing you today, I struggle to actually find ways to describe Farlan's paintings because they are very unusual. I was going to say it's a nice painting, but nice just doesn't seem particularly relevant. It's very unusual. It's got a lot of chutzpah as a painting. It's a great painting, I love it. And it's quite, I think, quite a good, the painting is quite a good match for the song Pretended and Played. The other thing I'm going to do today is read you quite a big, well, not very big, but a substantial little piece from the Wayward Way, and it features Paul Gauguin and Vincent van Gogh. There's a little bit about Gauguin, and then it goes into a piece called Paul and Vincent and what really happened in the Yellow House at Arles. And some of you will know what I'm talking about, and some of you won't. Maybe have heard of what went on down in the south of France between Paul Gauguin and Vincent van Gogh. But it didn't end well, and it was the place where Vincent cut off part of his ear, and had to be put in hospital and things. So this is Farlan's take on what went on between Paul and Vincent down at Arles. But before that, he talks a little bit about Gauguin, because Gauguin was one of his favourite artists, and so it's quite interesting to hear what Farlan has to say about the beloved Paul, as he called him, because he really liked Paul Gauguin. The other thing that we're doing today is another reading from Stonebreaker, and I am starting to wonder if if it wouldn't be a good thing to start from the beginning of a book of Stonebreaker, because, I mean, the Wayward Way you can kind of hop about and it doesn't really matter, but I'm wondering if it wouldn't be better to maybe just start at the beginning of Stonebreaker, and we're never going to get through it all. But I mean, it would, I don't know. Oh, by the way, I have found recently, whilst sorting, I was looking for, what was it I was looking for? Can't remember. I was looking for something and I came upon a box of Noura's books, Stonebreakers. We did self-publish, you know, a long time ago. So if anybody is interested in having a copy of Stonebreaker, you can just let me know, and you know, we'll talk to you about it. Now the thing about it is, it's not, I've told you this before as well, boring. It's, I mean, it's got quite a lot of spelling mistakes, because we didn't have professional editing, and we Noura kind of did it between us, so I think the main culprit is me. Bad editing and all the rest of it, spell checking and grammar probably as well. I mean, it's not absolutely excessive, but I think it's more than what is considered acceptable in books these days, and I know that a lot of people, it drives people crazy if they you know, spelling mistakes and all that, just they don't like it, but that is that's the way the book is at the moment. The ones I've got anyway, they do have these mistakes. Might become collector's items in the fullness of time. Who knows? But anyway, if you would like to have a copy of the book, just get in touch with me, and we'll get one to you. What was the other thing I was going to say? Yes, about oh yeah, about the Fosdex. Yeah, I just wanted to apologise for the problems with the sound quality. I know, you know, like spell checking in Stonebreaker, a lot of people like perfectly produced, like their music to be perfectly produced and kind of seamless and perfect in the production side of things. And so I want to apologise for the poor quality. It's not poor quality, but it's just not brilliant quality of sound. And I mean, it's just one man on an instrument and a bit, you know, who didn't really understand the equipment he was using, and me, who also doesn't understand it. There's a problem. But what I wanted to say, I wanted to make a point, and the point I wanted to make was, well, I once got a present of my little bit of a detour, but it is germane. I once got a present from an auntie of mine, and you know, it was beautifully wrapped, expensive wrapping paper, and it had beautiful bows and lovely tags, and it just looked like the most wonderful thing. And when I opened it up, it was something, I think it was a hair curler or something, some sort of machine or some sort of instrument to do things to your hair. Clearly, you know, it was because she thought that my hair was a mess and I didn't brush it properly. And so, you know, I was perfectly happy with my hair and didn't feel that I needed a hair curler or brusher or whatever it was. You know, so I was quite disappointed, and also I felt the little stab that was within it as well. It wasn't very nice. But the point I was trying to make about the music was the same. Sometimes I just feel that you know, the use of all the technology to make great sounds in music sometimes is, you know, it becomes more important than what the actual musician is doing. So You know, so you can get as fantastically overproduced and wonderful sounding stuff, but the actual singer doesn't really have anything very much to say or anything very much to put into the music. So sometimes even, you know, even something that's underproduced and maybe got crackles and maybe got a few coughs and maybe got this or that, and you know, doesn't sound all that fantastic. If the singer has got something really to say or something really to put into the music, that is actually more important than, say, the rapping, you know, like my auntie's hair curler. Anyway, that's just my view. Yeah, that's about it for today, and I hope you... Oh no, I didn't tell you about Stonebreaker. Stonebreaker we will do, it's Lloyd and Tom have found an old manuscript, and it's a story of someone from a few centuries ago who had some dealings at the place where Tom had his initial encounter that caused all these problems and that he doesn't understand. And so this story gives a few hints and a few clues as to what's kind of going on. And you know that Stonebreaker has a lot of different a lot of different qualities within the book, and one of them is it's a little bit in a way like an Agatha Christie. You know, there is that kind of you know, mystery element where there are clues, and you can, you know, you can look for the clues, and you can try and figure out what's going on yourself as you go along. So that's another aspect of the book that is quite you know, adds to the enjoyment. So I'll do that today, and we'll leave it there for now, and I'll see you again next time. Bye.
Pretended and played upon an autumn world, like one who loves to grow mellow, like one who loves to bow the violin, a stranger in his secret sorrow, a stranger in his secret sorrow. See his deep and weird as snow, but he sang more pretty all the same. Yes, he sang more pretty all the same. Pretended and played upon the ruins of many fine sunlit days with his friends. Smiled over the raggings of another sleepless night, but he sang more pretty all the same. He sang more pretty all the same. pretended and played a rogue and a vagabond, a rogue and a vagabond. Pretended and played upon an autumn world, like one who loves to grow mellow, like one who loves to blow the violin. A stranger be his secret sorrow, a stranger be his secret sorrow.
Extract from the Wayward Way. Paul and Vincent and what really happened in the Yellow House at Arles. One of my favourite artists, my all-time favourite, is the Frenchman Paul Gauguin. What a man, what an artist. Now, Sophia and Arifa don't understand my devotion to Gauguin. They say things like, well, you're a better painter than him, and if he'd have seen your stuff, he'd have broke his brushes. Yeah, lots of nice embarrassing things like that. Of course, I don't mind, they love me, see? Ah, but I do love me wandering old sea dog, me crazy Frenchman, me painter of dreamy womb-like paradises. Naturally, he had his faults. He was a great artist, after all, not some Christian saint, and some do say he was a hard, callous bastard, leaving his wife and children like that to travel halfway round the world. Yes, some do say that. But, dear reader, the man was a genius. He was stirred up and swept along by his God-given gifts. Really, he'd no choice. That, I think, is one of the main differences between a talent and a genius. A talent can stay unused, can work in a bank and play on Sundays. But a genius, such as Gauguin, well, you just light them and they're off like a rocket or a bomb. The poor mortal who's been blessed with genius has no chance. Mind you, Gauguin was a calm man. A slow man in some ways, a powerful man. He got the initial idea to be a painter when he was in his 20s, and that with the lighting of the touch paper. But it burned slow for a few years. But then when it blew, it blew. What a man, hey? What an artist. What a nose. Love his nose. I got a few books on Gauguin. Some of them got photos of photos as well as photos of paintings. There's quite a few photos of Paul Gauguin, so we all know very well what he looked like. He'd done a lot of self-portraits and all. The first portrait he did was while he was still with his wife and kids, his family. It's a tentative effort. He's in his attic. Impressionistic it is. Quite a modest picture. You can see he's simply looking at himself, trying to see who he is, trying to get a likeness. Really, it's a humble effort. You can see he was struggling, trying to paint, trying to be honest. Now, you look at his later stuff when he comes into his full powers. Arrogant. Ha! Oh yeah. Suffering. Contemptuous. A martyr. Got himself into the martyr thing he did in a big way. Sophia said, yes, he was a great man, but he shouldn't have gone with prostitutes. Well, dear reader, Sophia does just have the habit of laying it on the line. Arifa's in full agreement here. And, dear reader, I'm loath to criticise my beloved Gauguin, but really, he'd have done better steering clear of them glittering creatures of the night. Of course, he got syphilis off of one of them, he did, and there's no doubt this helped to precipitate him into an early grave. Only 54 when he died. Still, he'd done his great work. He'd bestowed his God-given blessings upon the world, and we are all the richer for his life, his legend, and his beautiful pictures. I never encountered the work of Gauguin until I was a young teenager. Birmingham City Art Gallery didn't have any post-impressionist paintings when I was a kid, but when I did at last encounter him in his work, I said, yes, this man is my brother. Now, you might think, dear reader, there's a hell of a distance between the pre-Raphaelites and a wild man like Paul Gauguin, and so there is, but they were both reacting against the rise of industry and science and the superdominance of modern civilization upon people, and the way society corrupts and destroys the natural innocence and goodness in men. Gaugin went off to regain his own lost innocence, regain his own lost Eden. He wanted to reject the modern world and its values. Of course, we know it's not that easy, but you've got to admire a man who went to the end of the road like that. Well, dear sweet reader, there's a lot more to say about Gaugin and his one-time buddy, Mad Vincent van Gogh, but that's enough for now. I got myself a cup of tea, made one for Arifa and a coffee for Sophia. Got myself a ciggy, and here I am, my feet up in the bed, ready to gossip a bit more with me dear sweet reader. I can hear some of me dear sweet readers groaning. Oh no, I hear you saying, not more about that disreputable Frenchman Gaugin. I mean, really, I'm reading a serious treatise on box decoration, and he keeps wandering off. I mean, why can't he stick to the point? Ah, dear reader, I'm having a rest from me labours upon me box. More of that tomorrow. Today I feel like having an idle chat. You don't need to read it. Tomorrow I shall resume my struggle with my last panel. Today I'm on holiday. Can't afford a day trip to the seaside, so I thought, right, I'll sit here and have a good old chinwag with me faithful readers. That Gaugin, he got himself a harmonium. Had it he did in his tropical studio. I love to think of him there in his native-built hut in the cool of the evening, him sitting at his harmonium, playing and singing into the still night air, his strange and beautiful paintings on the walls, gathering shadows about them, gathering time. I don't think he can have been a great singer like me. If he had been, his followers would have said so. No, not a great singer, but he loved to play and sing all the same. I expect he was hearty, expect he was sensitive, probably sang the popular songs of his day, probably got homesick sometimes for Paris and Brittany, where he had such a great time with his mates. Yeah, and don't forget, he was an old sea dog as well as an old Parisian. Expected quite a repertoire of drawing-room ballads, old sea shanties, Brittany folk songs, and maybe Maori folk songs too. He liked to play upon the mandolin and guitar too. Yes, I can see him there, prematurely old and sick, legs giving him jip, loving his art, loving his life, despite it all. He was, as well as a Frenchman, a man who could claim Peruvian ancestry on his mother's side. He said, I am Maori. He said, I am a Frenchman. He said, I am sensitive. He said, I am a savage. But in the end, he was a man like you or me, having a rough ride, singing into the darkening night like we all do, eh? Geniuses and talentless bastards alike, we all sing into the darkness sometimes, don't we, dear sweet reader, eh? I lived in an island myself once, dear reader. Not a tropical island though, far from it. Orkney it was, South Ronaldsay. Me and Sophia and Arifa. No little Sebastian though, he came along later. A barn it was, being converted to a house. Stood in its own 6 acres of grassy field. Our nearest neighbour was a quarter of an hour walk away. Oh yes, we lived in that barn for almost 3 years we did. I had a harmonium and I played and sang my own songs into those long dark Arcadian nights. Sometimes though the wind howled so loud and crashed around the house, like being in a drum it was, and a wild man outside beating out his crazy rhythms. Drowned me out it did, drowned us all out. Never heard in my life such a wind as I heard in Orkney. I could tell you some stories about our time there. Oh yes, and the songs I sang and the pictures I painted, and Arifa did too. Sing and paint that is, and Sophia did. What a time we had there in that remote and wild place called Hestley. Me, Sophia and Arifa, and the cats and the rats, and the fearsome Orkney owls. I must tell you about it sometime. Especially I must tell you of Seraphina. But for now, sweet reader, let's get back to me old sea doggy friend Gaugin and his pal Mad Vincent. They met in Paris in the 1880s, couple of nutters, end of the road as both. Vince, well, I expect a lot of you heard about him already. Seen the film most like. Kirk Douglas plays the Mad Dutchman and Anthony Quinn is Gaugin. Did you see it? Maybe you did, and maybe you didn't. Too busy having a good time to sit around watching Hollywood films about dead Dutch artists, eh? Well, for them what don't know, let's go back to 1888, back to the real men. Vince was indisputably a very, very highly strung kind of chap. He got an affair going with sorrow and despair. He was a poor man, sick in his heart and his mind, and who knows, his soul too. Of course I don't know that, only God knows that. He embraced sorrow as a creed. He believed in it. Now, he loved Gogh. I don't know why. Maybe Gogh was the kind of man who inspired devotion and admiration. He did, unhappily, also inspire hatred and ill-feeling too. Anyway, he wasn't wishy-washy like yellow ochre, that's for sure. Vince got sick of Paris, zoomed off to a place called Arles, little town in Provence. He was desperate for Gogh to join him there. Gogh wasn't dead keen, but he was stone broke, and so when Vince's brother said he'd financed the venture, Gogh said, "Okay, mon ami, you're on." That's how it came about that 2 out of the 3 major post-impressionists came to be living together in what was later to become famous as the Yellow House. Because Vince, who had a mania for the colour yellow, painted all the bloody walls in the place chrome yellow. Not a great decor idea for a highly strung type like Vince. Gauguin's misgivings about the whole venture of a studio in the south with Mad Vince were to prove fully justified. And that, dear reader, is some understatement. My dear reader is probably thinking, who was the other major post-impressionist? Why weren't he in the Yellow House in Arles as well? What would have happened if he had been in What the Fuck's Post-Impressionist anyway? Ha-ha. That, dear reader, is me benign paternal ha-ha. Patience, dear disciples, all will be revealed. The other major post-impressionist was a guy called Paul Cézanne, and he wasn't in the Yellow House because he wasn't invited, and if he had been, he'd not have gone, because he'd not have touched Mad Vince with a barge pole. "Vincent," he said to him once, "truly, you paint like a madman." I don't know what Vince said in reply. Probably something like, "Up yours, you Catholic son of a capitalist pig hat maker." Maybe not. I don't know. Anyway, even if Cézanne hadn't been mad keen to avoid Vince, he'd still not have gone, because he had a deep, deep distrust of Gauguin, whom he regarded as a talentless bastard of an old sea-dog. A maker of Chinese images, he called Gauguin. This statement was meant to be a withering, blistering criticism, but it's probable Gauguin was flattered. Now, dear reader, Gauguin was a proud and arrogant man, at times touchy, ready for a fist fight or even a lawsuit if necessary to protect his honour against the slightest slight, real or imaginary. But he was mightily impressed by Cézanne's painting, and he had bought some of them when he'd been in funds, and he'd literally have starved rather than sell his precious Cézannes. He'd even placed them in the backgrounds of some of his own paintings. In short, he loved Cézanne's work and was influenced by it, so he most likely would have loved Cézanne to have been at the Yellow House. But it wasn't his scene. It was Vince's scene. And so, dear reader, it was Vince and Gauguin, 2 of the 3 major post-impressionists, alone together at the Yellow House. 2 months they spent together. Writing about that period later, Gauguin said it felt like bloody years. Ha-ha, dear reader, I bet it didn't know. Nobody now can imagine what it was like, not really. Of course, Vince wrote to his brother, the saintly Theo, every day. These letters have been published. We can be as grateful as no doubt Theo would have been if he'd known about the danger that telephones had not yet been invented, because we've got Vince's letters to read, and poor old Theo didn't have to press a telephone to his ear hole to listen to his lunatic brother being excited. Phew, that was a close shave, Theo would have said, if he'd have known. And he was an educated man-of-the-world type guy, so it's possible he did know, because Alexander Graham Bell did in fact patent his telephone device in America in 1876. Of course, it took a good few years after that for the thing to become the worldwide pest it later became. Still, must have been anxious times for poor Theo. Maybe one for the historians this. Was Theo Van Gogh in communication with Mark Twain, the famous American humorous writer who turned Alexander Graham Bell away from his door saying, "No, I ain't going to back you. I'm with Theo on this one"? Well, as I say, this is one for your research grant-type historian. The fact is, Vince had to write to his brother. The letters make fascinating reading. Likewise, Paul, who was severely traumatised by the whole thing with Vincent, wrote all about it later. So, dear reader, while we can't really imagine what it was like back in the Yellow House in 1888, we can, to a degree, reconstruct the time from the two geniuses writing, and of course give thanks to the gods that Mark Twain was too smart to back a nutty idea like a device whereby two people could talk to each other from a distance. Phew, that was close, Theo. So back to Arles, 1888, winter, well, late October anyway. First there was pleasure. Two lonely men, passionately devoted to their art, meeting, having a few jars together, visiting the local sites, ending in a visit to the local brothel. For them guys, a nice day. Yes, I know, dear reader, but what can I do? It's no good me saying, look here chaps, this messing around in brothels isn't a good idea. Really, it's not. No good me saying that. People don't like you interfering like that. Anyway, it's a mug's game trying to give advice to people who have been dead for nearly 100 years. Don't listen, see? It didn't take long for the initial bit of joie de vivre in each other's company to wear off. Before you know it, they're in there, two hard men, clashing like a storm, raging and cursing and spitting and disagreeing about everything under the bleeding mad Arlesian sun, and that old mistral blowing all around them, making them even madder than they would have been anyway. So there they was, in that claustrophobic yellow house, cursing and swearing and blinding this and blinding that, and chucking their hats on the floor and jumping on them. Gaugin had a nice astrakhan hat. You can see it in his photo and self-portraits. Vincent had a straw hat decorated with candle wax. Ha, that, dear sweet reader, is an in-joke for fine goth groupies. See footnote if I ever get around to writing it. Now, at this time, Gaugin was in fact sporting a beret. That's a French word, that is, so you have to pretend the T is a Y, so you say beret. Really, you'd have thought the French would be more logical with their spelling, wouldn't you? Now, doubtless, my dear sweet reader is thinking, what did Paul Cézanne have made of all this hat stomping? Well, dear reader, he'd have loved it, he would. Yeah, loved it. All this stomping on hats, blissed out on it he'd have been. 'Cause see, Paul Cézanne's dad was a hat maker. Yes, he was, that's right. And Paul hated his dad. So I think you can be pretty sure that big old surly Cézanne had been sitting there saying, yeah, go on you mad bastards, stomp on them hats. He might even have chucked his own hat on the floor and joined in the hat stomping. Then again, maybe he wouldn't have, who could say for sure. Another one this for art historians. So let's not get carried away here. After all, Cézanne wasn't at Arles, was he? No, he wasn't. Now, all this excitement was okay for Gaugin, because he was no sea dog, see? Hat stomping had been not unlike doing a seaman's jig. But for poor Vince, it would have been too much for him, being so highly strung, see? The fact is, dear reader, Vince was getting nearer and nearer the edge, and afore long he was going to leap over it, laughing wildly, no doubt, and seeing things and all, I expect. So Christmas Eve, 1888, Mad Vince says, "Hey, Paul, where's me Christmas card? You've got me one, ain't you?" He shoots a dark, suspicious side glance at Paul, who was playing cat's cradle with a strand of hair from his famous horseshoe moustache. Paul started up, startled, and said, ouch, because of pulling a long hair out of his moustache. Then he got a shifty look on his face. Christmas card? Ah, geez, he thinks to himself, I clean forgot. Now there'll be trouble. Christ, he's a touchy bastard. Wish I'd stayed in bleeding Brittany. I ain't got you one, Vince, old son. I don't believe in all this Christmas crap. It gets on me nerves. More of a Buddhist I am, me. Well, says Vince, staring wildly out of his mad green eyes, I'm a bit of a Buddhist myself, I am, but I still expect a bleeding Christmas card off me best mate, I do. OK, Corporal, says Paul, in that maddeningly agreeable way of his. I'll make you one myself. Lend us a pencil and a bit of paper. Paul gives his famous sardonic grin. Here, Vince crashes his mad fist on the table. I don't want a homemade one. I want a proper one with sparkly stuff on it and snow and a little robin sitting on a sprig of holly. In short, a bleeding proper one, see? Vince is by now nose to nose with Gaugin, staring at him madly. Gaugin smiles and says, Calm down, Vince, old son, you'll give yourself hiccups going on like that. Vince stared madly at Paul, for for a long, long minute. Then, in a sudden, unexpected, jerky movement, he pulls a pair of scissors out of his coat pocket, picks up the local newspaper, what was lying innocently on the table, and begins snipping away at it with the scissors. Snip, snip, snip. Then, with a cry of triumph, he throws the scissors down on the table and, holding what was left of the vandalised newspaper up to Paul's face, said somewhat cryptically, "See, see." Paul thinks to himself, better humour the lunatic. He's starting to look seriously over the edge. "Very nice, Vince. What is it exactly?" Vince rolled his beady green eyes a bit and laughed maniacally. He shakes the newspaper in Paul's face. It falls into a row of dancing figures. "See now, do you French lunatic?" Paul decides not to take offence at this slur on both his character and his nationality. The poor Dutch idiot has clearly flipped right over, thinks the blessed Paul. He deserves sympathy, understanding, and avoiding like the bloody plague. "Ha-ha," laughs Vince wildly. "You still don't see, do you, you moron? You low four-headed French oaf. Dancing nuns, see? 20 dancing nuns." Vince's laughter became too much, even for the great Frenchman. It would not be true to say he fled the yellow house, but it would be true to say Paul felt a fairly urgent need for a breath of fresh air, Vince, old chum. And he exited, with dignity, of course. After all, he was the great Gaugin. But also he exited with a fair amount of speed. As he slammed the door behind him, he heard Vincent laughing wildly and saying in a strangely insistent voice, 20 dancing nuns, 20 of the bastards all dancing, eh? Ha-ha. Well, dear reader, I make no judgments. Only the great Creator himself knows the rights and wrongs of what went on in Arles that famous Christmas Eve. Gaugin was, by his own accounts, severely unnerved by Mad Vince's increasingly wild behaviour, and as we've seen, it all came to a head on Christmas Eve. So often I find birthdays and Christmases crisis points for highly strung types like poor old Vince. To rush through the harrowing events with all possible speed, let me give my dear sweet reader a brief description of what happened, and then let us move on to more cheerful topics. Vince cracked up, Gaugin panicked and fled, which shows you just how strung up he'd gotten in the 2 months he'd spent with Vince, because he was by no means a panicky nor cowardly man. But by this stage he was certainly as wound up as a virgin in a brothel. As he walked out that Christmas Eve, taking the air, he heard behind him, over the cobbled streets, them all too familiar, quick, nervous footsteps. He turned to see what? Mad Vince rushing at him with one of them old-fashioned razors. Paul said, "Hey, watch it, Vince." Vince froze in his tracks, turned and ran off into the night. 20 dancing nuns, he cried. 20 of the bastards, dancing. When Vince got back to the yellow house, he cut a bit of his own ear, put it in a box, and delivered it to the local brothel as a present to his favourite lady there. Then he went home, wrapped his bleeding head in a towel, and promptly fell to sleep. Meanwhile, Gaugin, unaware of all this, had decided he'd had enough of Mad Vince for one night, and had gone off and found himself a cheap hotel and booked himself in for the night, wedging a chair under the door handle for extra security. He had fallen into a fitful, nightmarish sleep. Christ, what a Christmas, eh? Poor old Gaugin, his iron nerves were all shot to pieces, but there was worse to come with the morning light. In burst the local police. "You've murdered your friend, you mad bastard," says the policeman. Poor old Paul was dragged willy-nilly to the scene of his crime. There, in the other house, on his bed, head wrapped in blood-soaked towels, lay one very poorly Vince. Vince stirred and groaned a bit. "Right," says the policeman, "I see it all now. He ain't dead, he's a nutter, he did it to himself. OK, Paul, old son, you can go." Paul didn't need telling twice. Fled back to Paris, and who can blame him? Not me. He went and dossed on his ever-faithful friend, old Scuff. "Oh, yuck," I can hear me dear, sweet, sensitive reader saying. "What a gruesome Christmas tale." Well, dear reader, I ain't Dickens. Vince want nobody's fairy godmother, and Paul, well, he want Florence Nightingale. So you see, everyone was somebody else, which is, after all, only what you'd expect from a book entitled The Wayward Way. Well, innit? Ah, but I'd love to have been a fly on the wall in Emil Schuffernecker's house that Christmas when his erstwhile buddy Paul turned up, nerves and tasters, most likely gibbering about Mad Dutchmen, and of course 20 dancing nuns. Well, dear reader, what do you make of all that, hey? Mad bastards, weren't they? Still, no doubt it had all been different if surly old Paul Cézanne had been there. But that, as they say, ain't history. And yet, you know, although Vince and Gaugin never met again, they continued to be friends, wrote to each other a lot. Gaugin had a magnanimous streak and Mad Vince had a humble one. So they got on okay by post. Stonebreaker, chapter 21. Looking out of his window into the passage that ran beside the house, Tom could see the night still was unyielding, and he thought, it is still a long time until the dawn. Well, go on, said Lloyd. He's got me interested. What happened next? Tom took up the manuscript again. It must have been hard, he said. It was a barbaric time. They would not have dealt with him with any kindness. So are these barbaric times, said Lloyd. I think this often when people speak as if we have learned and as if we have grown. Tom was nodding. So I used to think, he said, though of course we don't have public hangings anymore. But after my experiences last year, I wonder which is worse, their savagery or our cold indifference to each other. Sounds like poor Domenic had a bit of both, said Lloyd. I ran into the forest, Tom read. All through the dark hours I ran, and I was very much afraid, for I had never before been so deep into the forest, and I was terrified too, listening for the hunt at my back. All through that brief summer night I ran in my wedding clothes, and my fine clothes were torn, and I was scratched, and I ran until I came to a place in the track where the trees had receded, and the sky was clear, paling towards dawn, but still a deep blue. And in that sky were the brightest stars I had ever seen, and it appeared to me that they whirled like a dancer above me. Tom stopped reading and laid the typescript down on his knees. What is it? Asked Lloyd. Tom was looking towards the window. Outside, still, the night was ink black, but he was thinking of the stars above Shawlee. Nothing, he said. The forest would have been much bigger and wilder then, a scary place, especially for a boy used to the town life. There would have been outlaws and all kinds of wild creatures there that we have lost. It was wild enough for me as it is, said Lloyd. They were still in their coats, as the only heat in the kitchen came from the oven, and Lloyd had his shoes off and had his feet up on the arm of his chair towards the oven. He had a habit of stroking his temple while he spoke, and now, as the hand which stroked held a cigarette, grey ash was falling into his unkempt hair. You look like a complete rogue, said Tom, and he remembered the dishevelled man that had come to his door. He had not been like this. He had been in flight, and he had been afraid, but he had been different. He had been a man that belonged, and this Lloyd, he looked like the outsider, he looked like the pariah, and he looked a vagabond. And for a moment Tom shivered, as he felt a sense of prescience, and he wanted to hector Lloyd and to get him to tidy himself up, because he was frightened of what might be coming for both himself and Lloyd. Lloyd smiled and tapped his ash into the kitchen sink. Go on with Domenic, he said, it's important. While Shawlee destroyed the life you had, it made you immune to what the BSI have been sending out, and we have to find out all we can of Shawlee, which I think holds many secrets, and we must go back when we can and speak again to Rashid, who knows much more than he has told us yet. Tom was looking around his kitchen. There were cobwebs up near the ceiling, and the whole place was too small, the furniture too old, as if it had itself become disillusioned with the shattered hopes of men. He looked at the grimed edge of Lloyd's chair, where the pattern had been erased by too many faded arms. It was, he thought, as if the room was sensitive, and remembered, could never forget each of its tenants, as if the room had a heart and felt injured, as if it felt the woes and the weaknesses of all that had lived here, and had never been able to forget. Still, it was home, He looked at it even with affection as he heard the wind rattle the window, as he heard it around the old chimney breast. It had sheltered him. It had kept him from the outside. Seeing Shawlee had been dazzling, the forest as brilliant as if it was a mind in the last throes of a creative passion which was burning itself with the fires of its own intensity, almost painful really, and despite the way it had looked, he was glad he was here, at home, and he was glad he had a home. These wonderful autumns can keep it all to themselves, he thought. It's not that I do not acknowledge that it is incredible and beautiful, but I'm too tired and I long for the security of these safe walls, and that brilliance seems too much for me. And while I own that this room is small and shabby, still I love it, and I love being here. He said to Lloyd, "The ones that never know the cold road also never know what bliss it is to be within doors again, to have one's own place. The bored housewife who wishes her life enlivened, the corporate man who envies his employer's luxurious home. He never knows the intensity of the joy that can be had simply from having a roof over his head." But Lloyd looked at the ceiling as he replied, "Yes, Tom, it's wonderful. Now will you get on with Domenic, or pass it over to me so I can read it myself?" "Why, I don't talk about it that much, do I?" Tom asked, surprised. "You do," said Lloyd, "and you stop smiling when we get out of the place, and you don't start smiling until we get back behind that door. Now can we read Domenic, please?" "And then I came to Shawlee," Tom read out. "In the first light of dawn, I was small-minded then, and my life with my mother, us thinking only of prestige and good position, made it seem to me that the white church was small, lowly, and mean, and in my foolishness I thought it promised little. There were flowers growing around it then, and I must say that I have not been such a good housekeeper as was the churchman, for the weeds grow tall now and the trees encroach, but still I say this is the most beautiful place in the land. I went down to the church, and as I touched the door it opened to me, almost as if it waited for me, as if it welcomed me, and weary as I was, I first scented the air, which is the breath of Shawlee, the sweet fragrance of the place. Flowers, I thought, it is the little wildflowers. I was exhausted, and I was taking great deep lungfuls of air. I looked around, and there was nothing, just the cold stone walls, with a bar of the sun of the new morning burning gold, so that for a moment my eyes dazzled, and I thought I saw a white bird ascending, but it was only the glare of the morning sun. There was nothing, and again I was disappointed. No font, no altar, no cross, no sign of money spent, and I thought churlishly, this place is no good to me. There is nothing here that can protect me. I thought at the time that it would take money to help me, and I could think of nothing else that could help against the hunt that would surely be following me, and like a wild animal I listened for the belling of the hounds they would bring through the forest to discover where I was. Then I rounded the corner, and I saw the side chapel, as I call it, and there was the sleeper, and I looked at him, and I felt most profoundly his youth and his helplessness. I looked at him, and in that morning light the shadows chased across his face, as though within that white stone there were many dreams. But as I looked, I saw the same gold fired by the morning sun from his image, and I thought to myself, he was a hero. He was someone who was perhaps a prince, and I knew he must have been more than I was myself. And I felt my own predicament very keenly, because here I was, a beggar, and my clothes torn and dirty, and I had nothing now, no mother, no wife, no home, no child, no master, and no friend. I sat on the floor with my back to the sleeper's couch, and bitterly I wept for what I had lost, and even my tears tasted sour, as if they might burn the skin of my face. But then the churchman came hurrying to my side, and he asked me if I wanted sanctuary. I will tell you what he was like then, for he had, without my knowing it, a wide frame, and they knew of him, and they knew his wisdom in distant lands, but he wore a plain garb, as any of the country folk might wear, and I knew he was no priest. He was short, and he was not young, and his hair was white, but he looked on me with great kindness, and he told me that he was the guardian of Shawlee, and he said that he could offer sanctuary, and he told me that he had made the oath of the guardians that all must make when they become the guardian. And he told me that in the whole wide world, and even beyond this world, there were two principles. One was justice and the other mercy. But the guardian, he makes only one oath, and that is for mercy. He told me that no matter what I had done, still Shawlee must offer me sanctuary. I said to him, but I have done nothing, only I am accused where I have committed no crime. He took me off to breakfast, and he gave me a place to sleep in his little house near the church. But I was woken suddenly by a great to-do outside, and there were my accusers on horseback, and with runners too. They had their hounds with them, and the hounds were snuffling up and down, baying as they looked towards the house, and I was very frightened. The churchman went out, and he asked them what they sought, and they told him I was wanted for murder and theft. But the churchman spoke quite calmly, and said I was here, and they should not have me, and in this sacred place they could not take me. They demanded sight of me, and I went out, but so cowardly was I then, I hid behind the churchman. When they saw me, there was a rush to take me, but the churchman spoke to them, and they were fearful of him, and they held back. I could see my old master there, and he looked very angry, and I could see he believed all their lies, and he did not care what the churchman said. He would have me brought to the justice at Alton, and I would be hanged that day. I saw too my old friend Gogh, and he was wearing the gear I wore, and I saw my position had been given to him, and he was riding the horse that had been mine to ride as my master's most trusted servant. When he saw me, he smiled, the same smile I knew of old. Wry, but still it looked sweet and kindly, and though I knew all of him, still a part of me wanted to run forward and take his hand as if it was nothing, as if we were still friends, and I felt very sadly my own foolishness, for I knew my heart would never be able to see him as any but my dear friend, and I knew how now he was not worth any of my friendship, and was worth no friendship at all, for a man that can betray in that way is no friend to anyone, least of all himself. In a flash I understood all, and I understood why I was here, an outlaw, and he was on my horse, and I saw how he had taken my life, and he had misshaped it, and all for the aggrandizement of his own. Then my old master spoke to the churchman, and he frowned darkly on us both, as he said, "Give to us the criminal you protect, and we will leave you in peace." But the churchman said he would not give me up, and they began to talk amongst themselves, and some said they felt uneasy, and some said they should kill us both, as was their right by law, as the churchman was protecting a felon. But some said they should have this thing done properly, as they were law-abiding men. And then they began to ask to which great lord did the land about Shawlee belong, and the churchman replied it belongs to no man and to all. Then the more aggressive among them, people I had known, people that I had not suspected of such savagery, began to say, "Let us seize him and make an end of it, and then we may go home to our wives and our beds." But another, a young boy who had worked for my master, said, "Yes, but Richard Colley has an interest here." At that they were all silent, for all of them knew the name, and they feared it. They began to discuss, and I heard some say it would be an unwise thing to kill a man of such wisdom and good nature as the churchman, and then, reluctantly, they left, saying they would return. When they had gone, I knelt before my benefactor, and I cried, and I called him my friend and my father, but he told me to get up, and he asked me to help him clear the weeds that grew among the flowers, and also to clear some of the brush that encroached on the east side of the church. While I worked there, I looked often into the window, where was the sleeper, until I became dizzy, and I had to sit down, because of my recent trials. But I was thinking all the time of that face and that snow-white sleep, and had been thinking of distant lands and wastes of snow and ice, and journeys made there, and of strange and ancient people. The churchman came then, and he commended my work. I told him that I had never been afraid of hard work, and that I liked better to work than to sit and think, for I was still most agitated. But he told me to stop, and brought me inside to eat and to drink, for I had become very thirsty under the hot sun. Then I told him I should leave and find my way to the coast, but that I had no money. He said he could not help me with money, as he was a poor man, and he said the choice was all mine alone. But he thought it would be much better if I stayed, as they feared to take me here. But once I was gone, then they would hunt me down with all speed, and I should be killed out of hand. So I stayed, and on the third day there was a delegation from the town, but still the churchmen would not give me up. They waited for me, though, watching me like hungry hounds waiting for the master to throw his scraps, and I was very frightened. But on the fifth day Richard Colley arrived. I will tell you what he was like, because all of this has happened many years ago, and I am sure you will not have seen him. He was tall and of a dark complexion, and his hair and eyes both dark. He wore fine clothes, and though he must have been more than 40 then, he still had a look of athleticism, and was fit and hale. And I bear witness to this. In his silk and his finery, he was a magnificent-looking man, and any would think, on seeing him, there goes someone who is more than other men. I have had many things said of him, but this is the way I saw him. He went into the church and spoke for some time to the churchmen, and it seemed to me they knew each other well. When he came out, he called to me, and he asked me of my crime, and I answered. And while I spoke, he watched me, and his eyes, I noticed, were large and well-shaped and very dark, and they were frightening eyes, so that I began to feel alarmed, and to think back on what I had heard of him, that people said he was uncanny, and that he knew more than he should. When I had told all, he made me go through my story once more, and he asked exacting questions. Then he called up his men, and he said I should be brought with all due legal restraint to be tried in his court, and I said I would prefer to stay with the churchman, because I was frightened to leave him. But as Richard Colley mounted his horse, he said, "It is your choice, but I offer you your one hope of standing a fair trial. Otherwise you will be outlaw, and all will call you murderer, whether it is true or not." I turned to the churchman, who said this was true. The choice was all mine, and none should persuade me either way, but that there would always be a place for me at Shawlee. Though I knew Richard Colley was right, and even as I acquiesced, still I felt a sense of unexpected pain, and I looked longingly back over my shoulder at the church as it disappeared between the trees. And as I waved to the churchman, he called out to me, and he said, "Domenic, never fear, there will be a return for you to Shawlee, which is your home." I felt in my heart it was true. While I was too young to make any use of it, I had found a place of ease and restfulness, and I would have liked to stay and to look deeply within myself. I would have liked to have stayed and to have discovered what Shawlee had to teach me. But I knew it was not time, as I was too young, and still the world held much for me that I wanted, and though still I was frightened, eagerly I turned again to my road. So I came to Richard Colley's great house at Gogh, and I tell you, if you have not seen it, I think it is the largest and the fairest in the country, fit for a king, and in fact the king was a frequent visitor there. The old king, as was, and he trusted Richard Colley, and listened to his advice, and I knew that the advice he received there was sound, as Richard Colley did not look for personal advantage in it. This was before the time, of course, of the young king, who was very different from the old, being young and headstrong, and he did not like Richard Colley, but preferred men that were young and dashing in their way, and as foolish and as headstrong as he was himself. I had my trial, and it was properly done. Though I had to sit in jail while I waited for all to be arranged, all the witnesses were brought, and they were questioned by Colley's lawyers, who were clever men, and Colley sat in his great chair and listened to all the arguments, as he did when his court was in session. All the evidence was brought, and I was there, and saw all. And then my old master was brought, and they questioned him, so that reluctantly he had to admit he had never seen any sign of dishonesty in me. But then he railed against me, because he said he knew I had lied to my future father-in-law, and he said I had misrepresented myself as being a man of more stature than I was. But the lawyer bade him be silent. In the court Richard Colley held for the king, and he had to walk away, looking angry. Then they brought in my old friend Gogh. He came smiling into the court with his easy manner, and the lawyers seemed to like him, to want to be kind to him, and he gave all of his answers, so that I thought, Gogh, you have condemned me by making that which was innocent appear as other than it was. Then they brought in witnesses to bear testament to the character of my mother and myself, and it was then I discovered how much we had been disliked, and how far my mother had protected me as I was growing from that dislike. I understood then why we had been so solitary in my growing years, for they had made us seem as if we were evil and beyond liking, and I was alarmed, for I had no idea such ill will existed against us. I began to believe all was lost, but then Colley spoke to his lawyers, but quietly, and they began to recall the witnesses, and this time Richard Colley asked some of the questions, and he brought out information from them, and it showed their bent against me. Then they brought back Gogh, and he had his ready smile, and they would have let him go, but Colley questioned him very closely. And it was strange to see how my old friend became uneasy, and there were long silences in his conversation. But Colley did not hurry him, only waited for his answer, until I, myself, even with all I knew of Gogh, began to sicken at the sight of it, because Gogh looked so unassuming, so without deceit, and it was like watching a cat playing with a mouse, or like a wolf on the trail of its prey, because Richard Colley would laugh sometimes, as if he liked Gogh, laugh at the sometimes light answers Gogh gave. Gogh was like that, with his easy way, but always Colley would return to the questions, and though none of us knew where it was all heading, we knew that Colley was on the hunt, and would not let Gogh go until he had found his quarry.